I remember writing my maiden speech so well. I was 28 years old. My family were living overseas and I'd only moved back to New Zealand a few months prior. If I'm honest, I was probably more than a little shocked to be here. A feeling that even after 15 years never quite left me. But the reasons I came here, they never left me either. They're all there in my maiden speech. Climate change, child poverty, inequality. I am, after all, a conviction-based politician. And I've always believed this to be a place where you can make a difference. I leave knowing that to be true. But despite that, I've become used to my time as Prime Minister being distilled down into a different list. A domestic terror attack, a volcanic eruption, a pandemic. A series of events where I found myself in people's lives during their most grief-stricken or traumatic moments. Their stories and phases remain etched in my mind and likely will forever. That is the responsibility and privilege of the role of Prime Minister. A role I never thought I was meant to have. I remember sitting at my desk in the home that Clark and I shared in Auckland, writing a campaign launch speech. I knew I wanted climate change to be front and centre because I believed it would define our generation of politicians. I called it our nuclear-free moment. I believed it then and I believe it even more now. Now, I know there is politics in almost everything. This chamber understands why more than anyone, but we also know when and how to remove it. When crisis has landed in front of us, I have seen the best of this place. An absolute focus on the care of others, on preserving life and helping people when they need it most. Climate change is a crisis. It is upon us. And so one of the very few things I will ask of this House on my departure is that you please take the politics out of climate change. A friend of mine taught me early on in politics that there is no point looking back in anger. And I feel no need to, when there are so many things I feel proud of. Things that I know are different or better because we had a Labour government. Like our work to uphold the treaty by crossing the bridge more often. The creation of the Māori Crown Relations portfolio under the excellent leadership of Kelvin Davis. Thank you, Kelvin. The stewardship of Te Arawhiti, the establishment of the Māori Health Authority, the growth of Te Reo Māori, the evolution of how we see ourselves as a nation through the teaching of New Zealand history in schools, and the creation of Matariki, our first Indigenous public holiday. Yeah. The path we travel as a nation will not be linear, and it won't always be easy. But for the part of the trail that I had the privilege of leading, I'm glad we took on the hilly bits. Politics has never been a tick list for me. It's always been about progress. Sometimes you can measure it, and sometimes you can't. We won't ever know the long-term benefits of banning conversion therapy, especially for our young people, or what it means to our Pacific communities that we finally apologise for the Dawn raids. There will be no list of the lives saved because of the banning of military-style semi-automatic weapons. We won't know how we left women feeling about the ability to make their own choices when this Parliament decriminalised abortion, or when we improved pay equity, put period products into schools, or reach 50% representation of women in Parliament. And while these things may not feature heavily in the history books when they write about the years 2017 to 2023, which will likely be a very heavy few chapters, they are still nonetheless things I feel very proud of. I've often been asked what the hardest thing was about COVID. There were so many, but the unknowns was definitely one of them. I had a call with my Chief Science Advisor, Dame Juliette Gerard, very early on. I'd been thinking about how we managed the border in the future, and so asked how long she thought it would be before we would have a vaccine that might help us do that. Well, if we're lucky, she said, I'd say 5 years. I slumped into my chair. COVID made me sit down quite a lot, as it turned out. Thankfully, though, we had something better than luck on our side. We had science, and I remain forever grateful for that. But that wasn't the only thing that got me through. Firstly, I always knew there were New Zealanders out there doing it tougher than whatever we were experiencing on any given day. And it was them that we were there to serve. Secondly, I was surrounded by wonderful, smart, compassionate people trying to do the right thing. We didn't always get it right. I didn't always get it right. But we were always motivated by the right things. Thirdly, and most importantly, we went in as a nation with a goal to look after one another, and we did. A few weeks ago, to mark my departure, Dame Juliet gave me a mug. It had on it a graph depicting excess lives lost across developed nations. New Zealand had fared the best. If it wasn't so unorthodox for a valedictory, I would probably hold it up for no other reason than I love a house prop and to remind everyone what it was all for. You saved people's lives. Was it hard? Absolutely. But we'll never know who you kept on this earth to know how truly worth it it was. There were many moments that have left me bereft, though. I still struggle to talk about March 15. There is an image from the day after the attack that was taken of me through a window. And I don't believe I've mentioned what was happening in the moments it was taken. We'd brought together a group of politicians to travel to Christchurch, and the Defence Force carried us. On the way down, I'd seen the front page of the paper and the image of a member of the Muslim community covered in blood in the aftermath of the attack. It was a devastating picture. As we arrived at the meeting venue in Christchurch, we were greeted by a range of community members. Sitting in the front row was the same person who had only hours before been photographed. As he stood to speak, I did not know what to expect. But what came next was one of the most profound memories I have of that period. He thanked us. Here was someone who had been through the most horrific experience I could imagine. And he thanked New Zealand and expressed gratitude for his home. There is much we must all continue to do in the aftermath of March 15. I consider the work of the Christchurch Call to Action amongst them, and I feel honoured and grateful to continue work on the issue of radicalisation and violent extremism online. But the most significant task for us all, as a nation, is to live up to the expectations that those who experienced it have of us, to deserve their thanks. To the Muslim community of Aotearoa, New Zealand, you have humbled me beyond words. Assalamu alaikum. Mr. Speaker, having sadly seen our nation in horrific moments of grief, I've concluded that countries, they don't move on from tragedy, rather they become part of your psyche. But the way these moments weave themselves into our being will be determined by how we confront them. And now it's time for me to leave this place to the amazing people around me. But I want to spend the last few moments I have here talking not about why I joined them, but why others should. And not just in Parliament, but in leadership. Most of you know my story. I don't consider myself to have had anything in my life that made me especially extraordinary. I was a child of the 80s, born to the son of a drain layer and the daughter of a farmer. My parents worked hard, really hard. My father was a policeman. My mother ran the canteen at the local school. They also ran an orchard for a few years, all while working full-time. My sister and I were the first in our family to attend university. I was anxious about taking a student loan on, so I worked multiple jobs and entered speech competitions. Or to be precise, my mother entered me into them to try and earn a little extra money to put myself through university. I was a warrior. I anticipated that everything that could go wrong would. Some might say the worst possible character trait to have as a politician, or the best, depending on how you cut it. While I convinced myself that you cannot be a warrior and be in this place, you can. You can be that person, and you can be here. I'm sensitive, or as Maggie Barry once called me, a precious petal. I remember in my early days being thrown by the odd nasty comment or negative commentary. I even went to Trevor Mallard for advice on how to harden up. I thought that I would need to change dramatically to survive. I didn't change. I leave this place as sensitive as I ever was, prone to dwell on the negative, hating question time so deeply that I would struggle to eat most days beforehand. And I am here to tell you, you can be that person, and you can be here. I am a crier and a hugger. It's instinctive to me. I remember going into the aftermath of Whakaare and seeing a comment about how I was just going in to hug people again. It stuck with me, so much so that when a first responder who was emotionally telling me about their experience, I had an internal argument with myself as to whether I should comfort them when I knew I would likely be criticised. I would rather be criticised for being a hugger than being heartless. And so hug I did, a lot. You can be that person, and you can be here. I'm a mother. I obviously didn't start out that way. When I ran for Parliament in my 20s, I remember being afraid that I was choosing a path that meant I wouldn't get to have children. Because who has a personal life in Parliament? I was lucky. The job brought me to Clark, but having kids was a whole other challenge. When I was 37 years old, I was told there were a range of factors that meant I hadn't been able to get pregnant, and stress was probably one of them. We decided to use the help of science, but as so many couples experience, that wasn't straightforward. I'd not long experienced a failed IVF round when I became leader of the Labour Party. I thought that I'd found myself on a path that meant I wouldn't be a mother. Rather than process that, I campaigned to become Prime Minister. A rather good distraction as far as they go. Imagine my surprise when a couple of months later I discovered I was pregnant. There is no question I've had incredible support to be the mother I wanted to be, from the office team who tried to get me home for story time, and Neves Village who were there when I wasn't. But I leave knowing I was the best mother I could be. You can be that person, and you can be here. Now, I cannot determine what will define my time in this place, but I do hope I've demonstrated something else entirely, that you can be anxious, sensitive, kind, and wear your heart on your sleeve. You can be a mother or not. You can be an ex-Mormon or not. You can be a nerd, a crier, a hugger. You can be all of these things. And not only can you be here, you can lead just like me. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.